another session of Gallant Current Affairs and News Analysis. I have with me about 8 topics today. We have 4 mains topic and 4 prelims topic. The first will be dealing about Saudi and UAE relationships, and then we will be decoding the President's speech. We have concerns over the North Sea drilling and smartphone manufacturing in India. Then 4 prelims topics on Chandrayaan 3, Ecuadorian rejects the oil drilling. We have Malabar naval exercise and ICSSR to develop Indianized research methods. Now first we are moving to Saudi Arabia, UAE role models. If you have ever learned international relations, we see that about 50 to 60% of the policies of Saudi Arabia and UAE have certain relations, which means that they have been in the long run have been good partners. But recently there has been some changes taking over where the UAE is trying to take over Saudi Arabia, and we can actually see problems, arguments or even competitions coming in between both these countries. So if you are looking back, we have some bonding of the years. We have the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salam, called as MBS, and we have the UAE ruler Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. We could nickname him as MBEZ. So if you are seeing, UAE ruler has been ruling for a long time, and MBS, our Mohammed bin Salim, has been actually looking on to MBS as a role model. That is what certain experts have been claiming. Over the years, they have taken a lot of similar policies. They were partners in the war of Yemen. They have worked together in putting a regime in Egypt. They both viewed Iran as a threat to UAE and Saudi Arabia. And then they collaborated closely with the implementation of blocks in Qatar. In 2019, they also subverted democratic processes in Sudan. So these are some of the activities both the countries has taken together. Like overall, this is not important, but the thing is that you should know when you study the international relations, you should know certain aspects where they work together and where they did not work together. But if you are seeing the differences emerging with them, in 2017, what happened is that UAE abruptly rejected the proposal to cut oil production as per the OPEC+. And that is when Abu Dhabi actually then invested in its oil engineering. Like they were not going ready to actually cut their oil productions, but then they actually invested heavily into their oil production so that they could maximize profit out of it. The UAE also actually came out of Yemen war, but they actually supported Saudi Arabia and UAE together actually went to support the Yemen war. Then UAE withdrew from it, but still UAE was actually supporting and mobilizing the local fighters. UAE also expanded its maritime footprint and captured the ports of Yemen and such, and then taking control of Yemeni ports and the other islands which is there in the Gulf of Aden. They actually went to establish bases in Eritrea and Somalia, thus putting a place of UAE in the stand of Gulf in the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, which means that UAE is trying to establish its stand in the African countries, whereas Saudi Arabia was actually left to fight the rest of the war in Yemen. UAE is trying to normalize more relationship with Africa, and also it has actually normalized its ties with Israel. You see, with the Palestine and Israel issues going on, both these countries was against Israel pulling out the Palestinians. But then UAE actually went ahead to normalize its ties with Israel in August 22, leaving back Saudi Arabia alone. So these are not very important facts. These are some examples you can quote, but you don't have to actually by heart any of this. So the competition in the same sectors, like they have their own seeking and emerging competition in the base of global business, tourism, finance and technology. You can now see that UAE is actually growing in relationship with other Southeast Asian countries. Now we had the UAE, India has partnership, Vietnam, with Thailand, with Indonesia. There is growing relationship with these Middle East countries with the Southeast Asian countries. Now that is actually create a lot of, not cooperation, but it's going to create a lot of competition. Now Saudi Arabia also wanting to become a major player in this. Saudi Arabia wants to become a major player within the Middle East and in the global also. Now that is creating a lot of competition with the ideologies of UAE. Both countries are pursuing ambitious plan to develop ports in the Gulf and the Red Sea, and they are emerging as a major presence in the logical connectivity. Now we can see the same relations between India and China. Then there is similar competitions happening between Saudi and UAE. Also, too much smaller in size, UAE has actually made it clear that it will not be the king's junior, it will not be below Saudi Arabia. Now they are actually finding new trade partners along with the Southeast Asia like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand and Philippines. This was a major small topic in the case of the international relations. Moving on, we have decoding the president's speech. It's not important that you learn the president's speech, but you might get some passages or statements made by the president, prime minister. It will be very helpful for you if you can actually recreate these statements in your essay and ethics paper. Now, these are some of the important key areas where the president has actually mentioned in her speech in 77th Independence Day. So, if you are looking like statements like the president actually addressed the constitution, addressed the freedom struggle and especially women freedom struggle, actually talked about the economic empowerment of women and trying to make India inclusive and developed nation by the year of 2047. She also went ahead and talked about India's economy, particularly with the ongoing G20 summit. She mentioned about economic progress and the national education policy. As she herself was a teacher, she was pushing forward for the creation of national education policy which could actually transform the education sector. She talked about the Chandrayaan 3 and the National Research Foundation Bill to enhance the growth of the research from about research, and thus India can actually develop as a global sphere. And she talked about some keywords like empathy and all, which is actually lacking. So if you see here, I have three statements ahead with me. World seems to be suffering from a deficit of empathy. Indian economy has proven to be not only resilient during the turbulent time, but is also a beacon of hope to others. Then, Constitution as the guide. Constitution is a guide to the guiding document. So these three statements you can actually use in your essay or your ethics paper. These are directly taken from the speech of the Prime Minister. So if you're looking, I have taken out some paragraphs from the Prime Minister's speech I have here, where she stated as the Constitution is our guiding document. That is the first speech which I am talking about. Then she also talks about something very important. Like we all have different identity. We have different creed. We have different caste. We have different language. We all come from different region. But the main thing which we should have is a common identity. That is, we are the citizens of India. So the first identity and the primary identity we should have is that we are a citizen of India. So all these statements or the speech particles which she say can be actually recreated in your mains papers. She also went ahead and said that India is the mother of democracy, and since ancient time we had democratic institution, like we have heard about the Chola democratic institution of local self-government. We know that from the Uttaramerur inscription. So all this you can actually recreate in your papers. And other than this, she actually mentioned about a few women freedom fighters. We know Sarojini Naidu, we know Kasturba Gandhi, we know Aruna Asaf Ali and Suchita Kripalani. But she also mentioned some others like Matangini Hazra and Kanakalada Baru. Then she also mentioned about Ammu Swaminathan, Rama Devi, and such as some other women freedom fighters she has mentioned. So these names actually becomes important to you, because the new questions like prelims, you can get questions similar to this in your prelims stating about which freedom fighter it is referring to. Now let us look into two of the women freedom fighters she has actually mentioned. Matangini Hazra, she is actually a freedom fighter from West Bengal. So she actually dedicated her life to social cause and actually has been in several protests. She was a part in the civil disobedience movement. She also became a member of the Indian National Congress. So she was such a Gandhian that she was actually nicknamed as Gandhi Buri. It was actually written, a writer, Indian American scientist, a writer actually code named her as Gandhi Buri in his book Code Name God. Okay, so she was a Gandhian, she was from West Bengal. She has actually taken part in the freedom struggle, especially in the civil disobedience movement, Quit India movement, and she also joined the rank in the Indian National Congress. Then about Kanakalata Baru. She was actually a youthful martyr. She died when she was 17 years old. She was actually taking part in the Quit India movement. She was assumed as a leadership in the Mrityu Bahini, and she died after getting shot by a bullet. So our Indian Navy has actually contributed to her. Coast Guard vessel was actually contributed in her name, like Kanakalata Baru. This was actually in news a few years ago. But as the president mentions again her name in the news, she becomes important again. So these are some of the martyrs or the women freedom fighters we actually had. Moving on, we have a new topic. We have concerns of the Northern Sea drill. So if you see here, this is the Northern Sea, which is actually land, which is between our UK, Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark. We have Norway. So this comes in the North Sea. So what the news here is that the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak backed plans for more fossil fuel extraction from drilling from the offshore Britain coast. It will come from here, Britain's coast offshore. They are trying to drill more oil from the coast. This will actually help Britain to become more energy independent. So there is actually an environmental concern here, also an energy concern here. So there is a lot of debate going on with this topic. Now, if you are looking back to our 1958 Geneva Conventions, the 1958 Geneva Convention talked about the concept of continental shelf, which each country has for itself. As per this, it was the first international legislation to establish the rights of countries over the continental shelf, in which they have the exclusive access so that they can drill oil, natural gas, anything. They have the continental shelf for themselves, adjacent to their coastlines, and pave the way for exploration in the Northern Sea. According to this 1958 Geneva Convention, the UK actually pushed out a act called the Continental Shelf Act of 1964. So under this act, a lot of exploration companies was given more rights to explore the North Sea area near to this. The act provides for exploration and exploitation of the continental shelf based on the 1958 convention. So the first license was given to a company named British Petroleum, BP. They actually discovered natural gas and commercial oil reserves in the Northern Sea. In about 15 years, there was almost 15 fields of offshore drilling and natural gas fields has been actually discovered. By 1980s, not only British, there was US and other European agencies who were also drilling oil from the Northern Sea. And by 1980s, there were 100 such installations. Then the production of the Northern Sea actually peaked in 1999, which actually produced about 1,37,099 tons of crude oil and natural gas. Presently, this rate has actually declined to about 37,000 tons according to the official figures. So this is actually a background history of how the Northern Sea drilling, oil drilling actually started. Now, presently, what is the difference between offshore and onshore? So if you see here, presently we are only doing a little bit, only 30% of offshore drilling, because it's very costly and you are putting a lot of workers, water and wildlife at risk here. You see, it is actually this offshore platform is actually constructed in waters. There is actually 30% of the worldwide production of offshore drilling happening. The deep water drilling typically ranges up to 400 to 1500 meters deep the water. So if you are seeing the land, 70% of the worldwide production takes from onshore, while only 30% takes from offshore. Because offshore is pretty much dangerous, because you are putting the lives of the workers, water and wildlife at risk here. Doing offshore is more dangerous than doing onshore. So drilling in seas and ocean for fossil fuel is not only aggravates the climate threat, but it also warms the ocean and rises the sea level. The offshore drilling is associated with direct risk of marine biodiversity, and it will also indirect risk to coral reefs, shellfish and other marine ecosystem. So which means that this is offshore drilling is more risky and not environment friendly. That is why all the climate activists are actually concerned about this new law passed by the UK. So the climate commitments is that as per they follow a set of climate commitments which they actually create for themselves. They have the second national adaptation program which actually talks to them, which actually tells them what are the climate risk and what they should actually program they should actually do. But accordingly, they are not able to follow this national adaptation program. And also per the climate action tracker, UK climate action is not consistent with the Paris Agreement. So by the Paris Agreement, we know we have to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have the national determined contributors. We have, each country has their own contribution which they mentions. So the climate action tracker is saying that UK's statement is not in alignment with the Paris climate goals. The licensing of new oil and gas extraction plan is incompatible with the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that would actually rise the temperature. So that is about the North Sea drilling. Then we have another topic in mains on the smartphone manufacturing in India. This article actually talks about a tussle that is happening between the central government and also the former RBI governor named as the Raghuram Rajan. The present central government is stating that we have achieved a lot of exports in the case of electronics manufacturing, especially smartphones that has been created in India. So there is a lot of export and reduction in the imports in case of smartphones. But the present RBI governor, former RBI governor Raghuram Rajan is stating that these phones which are these central government is stating is not directly manufactured in India. These smartphones components of the smartphones are actually imported and they are just assembled in India and they are just labeled as made in India products and then given out. There is a lot of difference happening because central government states that it has created a lot of technology, a lot of jobs, it has actually pumped a lot of reserves in India, but that is not what the former RBI governor states. Now, if you are looking, this article actually talks about the production linked incentive scheme. So, this production linked incentive scheme was conceived to scale up the domestic manufacturing capability and to reduce the imports and increase the exports, so that India could actually become a global manufacturing hub in the case of electronics. Not electronics, but there are 14 sectors which is coming under the production linked incentive scheme. So, if you see here, these are the 14 sectors. We have the electronics, automobile, pharmaceutical, we have telecom, textile, food products, advanced chemicals. There are 14 sectors which actually takes a government has set aside of 1.97 lakh crore to actually aid the PLI scheme. But the problem here is that the companies are not ready to come in India and invest, because India doesn't have very skilled labor force and the infrastructure is also very less, because of which the companies from outside, international companies, are not ready to come and invest in India. So what did the government do? They actually formulated a carrot and stick policy. The stick is actually raising the import duties. If you raise the import duties, the import actually reduces, and they actually started giving a lot of incentives to domestic companies and other international companies to start the production in India. So that is what the government has did in this carrot and stick policy. The carrot is to provide subsidies and incentives to the companies which are working in India. So the PLI scheme, the government gives money to the foreign or the domestic companies that manufacture goods here. The annual payout is based on the percentage of the revenue generated up to a period of 5 years. So that is how the production linked incentive scheme works. The government actually, to attract more domestic and international manufacturers, they actually created the carrot and stick scheme. We have certain companies like Micromax, Samsung, Foxconn that can actually generate up to 6% of their incremental sales income through the PLI scheme alone. 6% of their incremental sales is done through the PLI scheme. So as per the central government, there was a variation in the import and export. If you are looking in 2018, financial year 2018, we actually imported $3.6 billion worth of smartphones, which actually reduced to about 1.6 billion in 2023. If you are looking the export, it was just 300 million of what India was actually exporting the smartphones. That presently has increased to about $11 billion. So the government is saying that what their PLI scheme was actually a success in the case of manufacturing of the smartphones. But the reality is that these smartphones are not completely manufactured in India. Only the parts, every parts are assembled in India. All the parts, the import, the screen, display, cameras, batteries, everything is actually imported by the government, and they only assemble it here. All the companies are importing the necessary parts and assembling them in India, and they are actually labeling it as made in India product. This is important as low-key assembly work doesn't produce well-paying jobs. Now, as if you are comparing to manufacturing and just assembling, manufacturing has more potential in giving more paying jobs and more employment opportunities, whereas assembling, it actually gives less pay and you just need less skilled workers. And it doesn't create the same multiplier effect that actual manufacturing sector might actually produce in India. Even if 60% of the imports are used for production, India's next export will still be negative, because we are importing about 80 to 90% imports, and even the exports will not match it, because the exports will become negative because we have more imports than export, which means that our exports will remain negative no matter how much the government exports it. The main divide is whether the PLI program will be able to create a long lasting jobs or not. Only time will tell if this PLI job sectors what the government has done is actually working in our sector or not. If these just assembling is going to work in the long term, would it actually provide a long term job and actually enhance the global economy in India. So that is what this article was dealing about. Now let's move on to our prelims section. We have the Chandrayaan-3 reveals dark side of the moon. As you know, Chandrayaan-3 will land tomorrow at about 6 o'clock, 5:45 to 6:15 p.m. in between. The Chandrayaan-3 will be landing in our moon in the South Pole. So as orbiting, the Chandrayaan-3 actually gives out the photos of the dark side. Dark side actually means dark side or the far side, which means that as a humans from the earth, we cannot actually see that one part side of the moon. When the earth is revolving and when the moon is surrounding the earth, we can actually only see one side of the moon. The back side of the moon, which covers about 41% of the moon, it cannot be seen. The first image of that was given by the Luna 3 of Russia back in 1960s or 70s. So that is how we are seeing only an image. 41% of the moon, that is the far side of the dark side, is still not actually cannot be seen by the humans. So Russia's Luna 25, actually as I have told you last class, they have actually crash landed into the moon. So all the eyes will be in the Chandrayaan-3, which will be landing tomorrow. So the far side of the moon is the lunar hemisphere that always faces away from the earth. The far side has a rough and rugged terrain. It has a large number of impacted craters. If we can see that one of the largest craters in the solar system, that is called the CaN basin, is actually in the moon, which is actually in the far side of the moon. Both the far side and the near side, both these sides actually experience 2 weeks of sunlight and 2 weeks of darkness. That is actually for far sides about. The far side of the moon is also called as the dark side of the moon, where the dark actually means the unseen side of the moon. So you can actually go and visit a video in the YouTube seeing how this dark side and this actually works, how this far side, why we cannot see the far side. That's it. Then we have the Ecuadorians reject the oil drilling in Amazon. Like the Ecuadorians, there has been a lot of political instability and tussle that has been going on Ecuador. So in this we can actually see the Ecuadorians actually voted out a proposal that was actually asking if they could oil drill in Amazon forest. But this Amazon, this region which we are talking about, is actually a place there is two uncontacted tribes actually reside, and there is also a national park and a lot of biodiversity hotspot areas. So the people actually voted against this proposal. Like if you are looking, there is the Yasuni National Park, which is one of the most biodiverse region. This Amazon drilling forest comes around this region, and two uncontacted tribes named Tagari and Tarominim. Just list out the names. You need both the names. You could actually get them in the prelim sections and such. So these inhabited types is important. You could actually, the UPSC can actually ask these names and state from which region or which country these tribes belong to. And also this Yasuni National Park. So you see here, this is the area. This is the Ecuador. This is the Yasuni National Park area. This is the area where they are actually looking into oil drilling in the Amazon region. This Yasuni is actually biosphere reserve site, which is actually given by the UNESCO in the year 1989. It has surface over 1 million hectare and hosts about 610 species of birds, 139 species of amphibians and 121 species of reptiles, and it has at least 3 endemic species. So this national park is very important, and that is why the oil drilling has been cancelled in this region, or it was voted against in this region. Now we have 4 Australian F-35 jets joining Malabar naval exercise. So as you see, the Malabar exercise was going on between August 11 to August 21. The Malabar exercise was concluded yesterday, and as per our Navy chief, they said that the Malabar exercise actually showcased a strong cooperation, shared values and collective ability between the 4 Quad partners, that is India, Australia, Japan and USA. So they are all participating in the Malabar exercise. Our Indian Navy, Australian Royal Navy, Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force and US Navy, the 4 navies actually participated in this Malabar exercise. Now this time the Malabar exercise was actually conducted in Australia. This is the first time this exercise was conducted in Australia. Now these Malabar exercise is actually a multilateral war games naval exercise which began in 19 92. Now this was actually an exercise between India and USA. Later Australia and Japan actually became the partners. They actually first participated in this Malabar exercise in 2007 and since 2014 they have been participating. This is the second time that Australia is actually taking part in this Malabar exercise. So you need to remember Malabar exercise from August 11 to 21. The timeline is not important. You need to know about the facts and the countries that represent in the Malabar exercise, and also you should know that Malabar exercise is a naval exercise. Now we have our last topic, ICSSR to develop Indianized research methods. So you see, we have a lot of schemes in India. Fasal Bima Yojana, Ayushman Bharat Yojana, we have the Benami transaction law, we have a lot of laws. So all these outcomes of how much output or they have created is actually has to be analyzed. But all these analyzed methods is taken from westernized model. In India, we have not created a model, Indianized model, because of which the socio-economic angle hasn't been correctly portrayed in this Western model. So this Indian Council of Social Science Research is actually bringing forward their Indianized method of research and research method to study the impact of various schemes and public policy initiatives in India. About 500 researchers will get the funding of the studies based on the geological regions. So they also actually plan to develop an Indianized research methodology tools by which we can actually study how the outputs of all these schemes work, so that we can actually portray correctly the country's social and economic changes. This which cannot be actually correctly portrayed in the Western model. The ICSR has actually mandated to carry out the primary data-driven empirical research on social and economical impact. They are doing it with two arms. They are actually collaborating with multiple institutions, and also they are actually doing an individual studies with it. So with all these collected data and outcomes of how the social economic development actually happens in India and how the schemes are affecting Indians, they could actually recommend the government the correct path or correct direction how which they could actually implement their schemes, how it is going to affect that of the citizen, and you will get the much more correct data. So this was the last topic for today. I don't have any practice question today. This was a long session. So I'll be bringing new questions and new topics tomorrow. You will get the PDF from our Telegram channel, Gallant IAS. Thank you and have a nice day. I'll be seeing again you tomorrow. Thank you.